Hi, money magicians. How are you? Welcome to another Money Magic podcast. If you have just joined, I am the host for the podcast. My name is Vangile, and I am a money trauma coach. I help mainly women of color heal ancestral money trauma so they can fall in love with their bank accounts, increase their income, and live their best lives. Today's topic is on the God wound. So before anyone gets upset, if you haven't read my book, What's Your Money Personality, then you probably don't know this, but the God wound has nothing to do with Christianity or looking at religious trauma in depth. In fact, the God wound has to do with our own sense of divinity and how we relate to the divine. So, how we relate in relationship with whoever we consider to be God, right? And it is the wound that comes from the split of being made to forget our own divinity and the trauma of having to relationship with divinity from a space of harshness or from a space of trauma. And that is deeply linked to our childhood trauma and even our ancestral trauma. And today's podcast, I'm going to be talking a lot and citing. I'm going to be reading a lot. I'm going to be citing research to help you understand what that looks like. And then we're going to deep dive into how this impacts our finances and how this impacts our ability to increase our income and also grow our businesses, scale. There's just so much to this. And whenever clients come to me and they say they have tried every modality, obviously we always think we've tried every modality, right? When we want something to shift. But things are just not shifting for them. Where we start is the God wound. And when I tell you the shifts that happen, it's remarkable. I'm also going to be sharing some of my own journal insights. I'll be reading directly from some of my journal insights from the Vow to Prove the Unfairness of God meditation in the Money Magic course. I'm a student of my own work in the Money Magic course, and I've used this work to break through tremendously. So, and before we even start, I'm going to start off by reading a quote by Woody Allen, who says, "If you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans." And although I'm not a fan of Woody Allen, right, I really love this quote because I think it's so accurate, right? And we'll be talking a lot about, I'll be talking a lot about that in this podcast today, about how the God wound is directly tied to our trauma of needing to also remain in control, especially if we grew up with parents that were eternal children, one of the archetypes I talk about in the book, but I feel like it's very self-explanatory, and how we then needed to basically make sure that everything was in order and in control, and how that could have created a God wound. And even though we are expanding, there's room for more expansion if we just work more with our divinity within, not necessarily religious divinity or scripture, any of that, right? So that is literally the purpose of this podcast. It's to help you understand where you're feeling stuck, why you may not be able to break through, and how that may be playing out in your finances. Before I even start and explain what the God wound is, let me talk about how I came to do the work on the God wound, right? So let me just share a snippet of how I came to do the work with the meditations in the Money Magic course. So for a long time, when I started doing this work, I hired a coach, and she told me she was my life coach, Joan Sebeza, who will be interviewed at a later date on this podcast. And she basically had me doing the inner work. I started with the work of Byron Katie every single day for like 6 to 8 hours a day, 8 hours mainly for like 6 to 7 days a week for 6 months nonstop. And I just love the work of Byron Katie, by the way. And one of the things that Byron Katie talks about is to ask yourself, is this your work? Is this basically your issue, someone else's issue, or God's issue? So is it your work, God's work, or someone else's work? And if it's God's work, you just let it go. And by God's work, she's talking about the universe. By the way, I'm not Christian, right? So she's talking more about like the universe, or whatever, again, that you consider the divine. I have a very strong sense of divinity, right? And what divinity looks like, or how rather divinity operates. Or so I thought, until this week. I'm doing a lot of the God wound work. So as the deeper I went in this work, I started to understand that actually, wow, it's not just inner work, that it's not just the inner work that I'm doing, but that the more I do this work, the more connected I feel to the universe, my life, whatever you want to call it, but that spark of divinity. Then fast forward, so this was in 2011. Yeah, I started doing the work seriously in 2011. And then fast forward 2018, I find myself in Thailand. Things are just not going well. I've had a retreat in Thailand. It's gone well. I've started getting clients, coaching clients, and I'm doing Wealthy Money full time. But for the life of me, I can't go beyond $2,500 a month in my business. And I had this desire suddenly to start making $8,000 a month in my business. And I'd been working at this for so long. For about 4 months, I'd hired coaches, I'd done everything, and things were just not moving forward for me. In fact, it felt like I was regressing. I mean, obviously, sometimes that happens a lot with the inner work, so I was used to that. But what was happening with me wasn't that I was just regressing. It's that every time I felt myself feel the desire of wanting to make more money, I could energetically feel myself resisting that desire. So it's so weird, unless you have experienced that, right? And some of us have. A lot of my clients have experienced this, where you want a thing, but sometimes you can feel yourself holding back. And I couldn't understand why. And the more I was doing the work, that I want this desire, I want to make this amount of money, the worse my resistance got. And it just was driving me crazy. And one day I decided to just do EFT tapping the whole day. Because also, not only was that happening, I was frustrated. I was literally going from $2,500 a month. At that point, my income had gone down to $1,500 a month. And I was living in a foreign country, right? I needed money to travel. I had visas to pay. I had flight tickets to pay. I was dipping into my savings. My financial advisor was calling me consistently, you need to keep up your investments. So, it was just bad. So in the middle of this tapping, I think maybe after like 4 hours, I can be very intense when I'm like really frustrated. So I just started doing EFT tapping nonstop for like 4 hours and crying. And just like this internal voice came through, and it was just like a meditation was literally channeled to me. And when that happens, I get my laptop and I start typing out how the meditation would look, questions to ask myself in the meditation. and I just instinctively knew, and I just heard, vow to prove the unfairness of God. So this is how a lot of my meditations have been channeled to me, like so many of the money magic meditations. So in that moment, I started doing this work, and I realized that I was hella angry at the divine, super duper angry, right? I did not want to break through because one, then people would say, wow, look at how incredible her parents were, in particular my mom, because then do you truly have trauma if you've if you've started making money? That was my first thing, and I needed people to see my trauma, and I was holding myself from expanding and shrinking myself in order to have people look at my trauma and see it and say, wow, she does so much, but she's still not breaking through. Oh my God, she must be so traumatized, right? So that was one thing. And the second thing was I also wanted people to see how unfair the divine had been to me. So I wanted to be like, those people that's like, I'm doing all the right things, I'm meditating, I'm doing yoga, I'm even fasting, I'm doing the most. But when people look at me, they can really start to doubt if the work works or if divinity works, even though I was doing the work, right? Because, wow, that means that it doesn't matter how much you do the spiritual work, there will be no breakthrough. There's nothing that comes. And so I wanted to use my life as a way to have people say, the work doesn't work, meditation doesn't work, going within doesn't work. Look at all the work that she's doing and it is still not working, so that I could just like have people turn away from anything to do with divinity by using me as an example, doing the very most and using that as an example. So basically turn myself into a poster child to make people doubters. Now you may ask, why would I do that? I talk about that in the book. I'll read a little bit about that. I don't talk about my story in particular, but I talk about some of the research and how I back that up. This theory is actually backed up in the book. Is that, well, I had grown up seeing my mom being this intense prayer warrior, right? Prayer warrior, but also talking to the ancestors, really just like being an African mom, before you go to bed, you pray when you wake up. But luckily, I was never really forced to do any of that. I was given a lot of leeway. Me and my siblings were allowed to go explore our spirituality as a result, at least, especially from my dad's side, right? Like I've got a brother who's an imam, he's Muslim, he's an imam, recites the Quran in Arabic fluently. I've got a brother that's an atheist, my sister's a Sangoma, and I'm Buddhist, right? So I was allowed to go explore and find my own path. But watching my mom go through the struggles that she went through, even when she was praying, what I didn't realize as a child and as a teen in particular was that I started to develop a deep resentment towards the divine. I started to feel like the divine is unfair to us, and I wanted everybody to see how deeply unfair the divine is, right? That it doesn't matter how much of a prayer warrior you are, it doesn't matter how often you go to church. And I mean, I'd seen my grandmothers go to church, really pray, and I ended up with that anger and resentment. Again, that was my own trauma, right? But what I have seen is that sometimes the most religious and sometimes the most spiritual amongst us really holds a lot of, we tend to hold a lot of trauma, a lot of resentment towards the divine. And because we're also taught not to question our anger, to explore our anger, explore anything around the divine when it comes to quote unquote challenging emotions. We are taught to rather fear the divine. It can be very, very triggering and very, very angering for most of us when someone like me comes and starts asking questions. And I have an entire lesson that can take months to do in the Money Magic course on the God wound, right? So it can be very triggering for many people. And what I have found more than anything is that it is hard to hold the energy of resentment towards the divine without holding that energy of resentment and anger towards yourself, because you are literally divinity incarnate, right? We are all expressions of divinity and expressions of the divine. So it becomes extremely hard for us to remain angry at the divine or how the divine has been projected or taught to us without feeling that same anger and resentment towards ourselves. And my clients are always shocked when they do the work and they find that there's a level of anger as well towards ourselves. And a huge part of my anger also stemmed from the fact that watching my mom go work so hard and pray so hard, I then decided I was going to convert to Nichiren Buddhism. Not like I still really have lots of love and appreciation for Nichiren Buddhism. It's just that Vipassana was my path, right? We all have different paths to connect with divinity. I'm a true believer in that. 7 billion people, many different paths to get to understand the divine, right? So I started chanting, and I would chant 10 to 20 hours, sometimes over 2 days. I want you to imagine sitting in front of, there's a scroll called the Gohanzan, and you just fold your hands and you just chant nonstop. And I was chanting for my life to become better, and it never did. And it's only when I started doing the God wound work that I started to understand why, right? I was chanting from a space of anger and also holding that vow that I want to prove how unfair the divine is. So on the one hand, I'm praying and chanting for a shift. On the other hand, I'm praying, deeply praying and chanting without knowing it at a very subconscious level for a non-shift, so that people can see how pious I am, and from that be like, wow, why doesn't this work? She's the most pious of them all, and it's not working. And that was all me. So it was always like this accelerate, break, and we don't talk a lot about that because it feels like sacrilege. People don't want to explore that. But what I will say, my own story, right? So I went from that dip when I started doing the vow to prove the unfairness of God meditation. I went from that dip and in income of $1,500 per month, and the next month I actually hit $8,000 in income. First ever. I didn't go to $4,000, $3,000, $5,000. I went exactly to the income level that I wanted, right? And that was a huge turning point for me. So whenever I feel like I've tried everything, I've done everything, I go back to the God wound when it feels like nothing is shifting, because then I realize that sometimes this is where we are. And one of the things with the God wound is, apart from blocking expansion, it also blocks us from allowing things to be easier. Because if we could just ask for support from the universe, from the divine, from angels, right? Things could really shift, from ancestors even, because the God wound encapsulates support as well, right? Like divine support. So if we could just ask for that, it would make things so much easier. But some of us are just staunchly like, I'm in this wound, not willing to acknowledge it. And what ends up happening is we go at it alone and we just keep hitting our head, knocking our heads against the wall, because we truly believe that we are the ones that we get to rely on, that nobody else is reliable. So, and at the core of the God wound is the belief that no matter what I do, nothing will work out for me. I am not loved by the divine. I am not favored by the divine. Others are more favored by the divine, and it will show up as intense envy and jealousy towards other people and their successes, and wanting to tear down what others have established. So the God wound is really, really deep. And yeah, I think let me just start. I feel like I've just talked a little about how I've come to the work on the God wound, or rather a lot. So how do you define the God wound? Okay, so because I tend to be very verbose, I am going to read that from the book. Because the book is, when I sit down and I write, I try to make things a bit shorter and easier to digest, right? So let's talk about the God wound. So in case you don't know, I have a new book out. It's called What's Your Money Personality? Changing the Way That Black Families Manage Their Finances. It's available at Exclusive Books, Take a Lot. If you're in South Africa, Exclusive Books, Take a Lot. And if you are abroad, it is available at all major bookstores, even Barnes and Noble. In the US, friends have gone in and asked them to order it. But you can also just order it on Amazon. It's available at all the major ebook platforms, right? So here's what the God wound is about. There is a wound the definition of the God wound. So if you're wondering, this is page 177 of the book. There is a wound that I call the God wound, a body of work I created to encapsulate the relationship we have with our own divinity and how this impacts our ability to ask for and receive money and support. The God wound has nothing to do with the church or organized religion. Rather, it's a wound that originates because of us forgetting our own power and that we are divinity in human form. It's also a wound that develops when we encounter constant disappointment and are left feeling betrayed or unfairly treated by God, Source, or the universe. This is very real and can cause deep wounds and block manifestations. When I started understanding how trauma affects our relationship with divinity, I Googled divine wound and God wound and came up with nothing. So I created a body of work. I created journal prompts, guided meditations, breath work, and EFT tapping exercises with specific scripts to help people heal this wound, and tested the work with hundreds of clients. The results have been astounding. Truly, they have been, right? And so that is the God wound. And one of the things I also then forgot, I wanted to read from the book how the God wound impacts your relationship with money, right? So the God wound, affects our relationship with money by literally leading. So one of the interesting things is it works two ways, right? It can also increase our income and investments, right? One, if you are a fixer archetype, I talk about that in the book. So one of the archetypes that is very rare in our society, actually. Most people think that they are fixers, but they actually tend to be sweet ones. But this is an archetype that is very driven and is scared of losing control. So because they're so scared of losing control, they have to always be in control in their lives. and it becomes a war between them and divinity, because the way that they've been taught about, the way that most of us have been taught about divinity, right, not just them, is that it is something external to you, not something internal to you, right? So it can sometimes lead to increased investments and income because you have no one, you believe that you have no one to rely on. You are your own person that you rely on. But at the same time, it can make you tight-fisted because while you are the only person that you can rely on and there's no space for magic and miracles, right? The flip side, it can also lead to decreased income and investments for those of us that are not fixer archetypes. I am not a fixer archetype. And because for most of us, then we feel like, well, we're not supported, and it can leave you feeling very alone in this world, feeling like, what the hell is the point? Everyone else seems to be more supported than others. And you can end up blocking your own success, again, because of the vow to prove the unfairness of God. It can definitely also lead to increased debt for the same reasons, right? So instead of and this was a big thing for me, I would always go into debt because instead of tapping into my own power and abilities to make things happen, I used to, because I had no connection to my own sense of divinity, I couldn't believe that in 24 hours I could manifest things and make things happen, because I also have divine powers, right? Because I am divinity incarnate, or I could connect with the divine and ask for help and support. And as a result, for me, that meant that like the only things that I could rely on were credit cards, right? And when I started to heal my God wound and started to understand that, wow, I am powerful. I am truly powerful within, just as me, I am enough, I'm powerful, and I've got so much support. I don't walk alone. I am supported by spirit guides. I have divine support I can tap into. I'm also supported by my ancestors. Then things really could shift, and I was able to decrease my debt because in times of emergencies, I could tap into that. But as long as I felt powerless and felt like I couldn't make a change in my life, it was very, very hard to believe that I could change things. I always relied on credit cards. As we talk, I have not had a credit card in years. The last credit card I had was, wow, in 2012. I haven't had a credit card. I tend to do everything cash. And my credit score keeps increasing. It's ridiculous, right? A lot of these things are very, very awesome. And I feel like a lot of it can have a magical quality to it, right? And also it can lead to decreased savings, right? Because sometimes when we feel so powerless and we're so angry and we're wanting to have everyone see how much we've suffered, we literally create our own suffering so that we can show how unfair the divine has been to us. And I have seen this often. Like I said, my mom is a praying woman, right? And huge on that, by the way. And one of the things that I have seen with her consistently is how she will say things like, no one has suffered more than me, right? And it's almost like this martyr archetype where like, oh my gosh, woe is me, I've suffered. And that will literally often be her wanting to, and how it will play out in her finances, even though she's a great saver and she really, really puts away money a lot for a rainy day. It will play out with her also just depriving herself of a lot of things, not seeing her own abundance because the image that she has created of her suffering, right? And even when she goes into prayer, she will pray like that, like, God, I am suffering, please help me, all those things. Again, we all have our own relationship with the divine, and I am not one to judge my mom's relationship with the divine. But what I did see was that I took on some of those qualities, and it impacted my savings, right? Like I said, my mom is a great saver. It didn't impact her. Again, she's also a fixer archetype. I, not being a fixer, was deeply, deeply affected by that, right? So yeah, and it affected my savings. So my savings were constantly decreasing because I had my own drama. So, Kim, I'm going to read a little bit more since we're talking about how the God wound impacts our finances, right? I'm actually going to read some of the journal prompts some of my journal entries from my most recent God wound meditation. So very, very personal, but I think it will help shed light on some things, right? So in the Money Magic course, lesson 17 of the course, I have the body of work of the God wound is there. That's where it rests. And one of the meditations in there is the vow to prove the unfairness of God. Like I've said, it's one of my favorite meditations when I'm feeling stuck or when I feel like I've done everything and things are not shifting, and I've done the practical stuff around money, I've done the emotional work, all that, the God wound work, because it's such subtle trauma that I would never even see. And wow, it always blows me away just how subtle the stuff is, and I would never have seen it if it weren't for this work, right? So one of the questions in the journal prompts, after you do any of the Money Magic meditations, you also get journal prompts so that you can journal for about 15 to 20 minutes and reflect on the meditation and your insights and aha moments. So one of the questions is, how did you behave when you stopped trusting the divine? So the meditations, you do them over and over again because you have different things that you see. So what's been the impact of this loss of trust in your life? So one of the things I saw in this meditation was, I said, I just stopped connecting with the divine. I felt like the way to protect myself was to never trust the divine, and that I would always be guarded of the divine, especially if I'm given something, because then it can easily be taken away, or the divine can flip on me just for the fun of it. That's not the divine though. That's not God. That's my mother. That's how I learned to be loved as a child, and I learned to shrink myself to get love. Now I'm starting to wonder what would be like to keep expanding myself, right? And then the next question was, how did this vow to prove the unfairness of God change your relationship with yourself and how you see yourself? So in this meditation, you get to meet various versions of yourself or your ancestors, and you get to understand how this vow has traveled through the bloodline or has traveled with you through past lives or even in this lifetime. Funny enough, in recent meditations, my vow to prove the unfairness of God is definitely centered in this lifetime for now. I've had some vows that were centered in past lives, right? But recently, a lot of my vows were reinforced in this lifetime. So my answer to that is, how did this vow to prove the unfairness of God change your relationship with yourself and how you see yourself? And I said, I learned to shrink myself so as not to annoy God, because that's how I learned to be loved and to be in relationship, because I had a mom who needed to be the center of attention, and if she wasn't, then there was hell to pay. If I didn't do what she told me to do, then there was hell to pay. If I didn't behave the way she wanted me to behave or dress the way she wanted me to behave, then there was always hell to pay, or I would be beaten. If she saw me being just myself, then she would find a way to make me cry if it wasn't what she wanted. So I learned that is how you should be when it comes to the divine. And then the next question is, how has this vow changed your ability to ask and receive your heart's desires? And I responded by, I'm scared to receive, because if I receive too much and have too much joy, then I am scared that the divine will get angry at me, right? And will be really, really upset with me. I learned in Catholic boarding school that that God loves us unconditionally. So as a child, my definition of unconditional love was how my mother loved me. So I was scared of God and the divine. My inner child expects to be punished for expansion. After all, if God is a jealous God, then God would want to be centered in everything. And when they are not, then they could probably harm me. Again, this is my understanding of what this means, because that's what I saw with my mother when she wasn't centered in everything. So I was like, wow, that absolutely blew my mind. So yeah, still the journal entries. And then the last one is, what are your aha moments from this meditation? And these questions are how I end up actually doing all these podcasts and having ideas for books, questions for clients, because I get so many insights from my own work and doing the meditations myself, right? So what I said to that is, I am learning that the way we were loved by our caregivers as children impacts the way we interpret divine love, not just relationship love, not just romantic love, because we are in a relationship with the divine. If we grew up believing we need to be something or do something to get love from our parents, this is how we will approach our relationship with the divine. If we had to be perfect to get our parents' love and attention, we will believe we need to be perfect to get the divine's love and attention, and will do the most before we get a breakthrough. We will energetically hold ourselves back from expansion until we achieve that perfection. Wow. I'm actually thinking, yep, that is actually the truest insight I've had in a while in one of the meditations. So I absolutely love this work because of that, right? These incredible insights that I get from the meditations. So before going any further, I also thought, wow, let me also share some of the research that I've done around the God wounds. So I'm a big believer in my work of course, I get insights and I get guidance from the divine or whatever, right? And I can write it down and do these meditations with people and guide them in certain things. And maybe it's not just guidance from the divine. Maybe it's something from a past life that I've done. Maybe I've done this work before in a past life. I definitely feel that's what it is, right? And my mom says that some of my ancestors have done this work before. So, I just feel like it comes through and I love it. But I also love backing it up with research. I love really understanding if this work can be supported with evidence, empirical evidence, and scientific research or empirical research, right? Because for me, I think if you're going to be working with people and doing this body of work with people and asking people to do this work, there has to be some kind of deeper understanding besides just me saying, oh, this is what I have noticed, and this is what my clients have seen. I love helping people understand why certain things are the way they are. So I found like a really, really cool study that I've been doing so much research on this and watching podcasts on this, watching YouTube videos. It's incredible. Like I love what is known as religious psychology. I think it's really interesting. There's a study by Richard Sosis, I think that's how you pronounce his name, in 2003. And he looked at communes, religious communes, and secular communes, so non-religious communes. And he said, and what he found with that was that religious communes endured 4 times longer than secular and non-religious communes, right? The reason, or non-religious communes, the reason is quite simple, right? Is that religious rituals and sacrifices like dietary restrictions, fasting, dress codes, prayer, created strong bonds amongst members. And the more costly the sacrifices, this is so interesting, the more costly the sacrifices people had to make in the name of the divine, right, or the religious practice, the more likely the religious organization is to survive. These sacrifices actually ensure that only truly committed people stay in the commune and remain in the community, right? And it helps the group survive. And it also builds resilience. So part of why it builds resilience is that a lot of sacrifice teaches you to keep going and to be resilient. So I found that interesting, right? So it's not, and that it wasn't actually so much about the hardship and the sacrifice. It's that sacrifice was linked to religion and was made to be sacred, right? And ties into divinity. And it got me thinking about so many of us, right? Back to even my work, even what's coming up for me now as I'm busy doing the God wound, which is this belief that the divine requires sacrifice, requires to constantly be centered, is more focused on punishing me for my wrongs and will forgive me if I come back and center them, then the divine is in experiencing life through me. So I found that interesting, but it is a huge part of human nature, right? And so most of us, we tend to think that our suffering is somehow, how do I put this, sacred. So in our trauma, we can fall victim to the idea that suffering is sacred, and that the more we suffer, the more godly we are. So the less money we have, the more spiritual we are, and the more money people have, the less spiritual they are, the more joy they have, the less spiritual, the less religious they are. And so we end up blocking ourselves from making money, from growing, from expanding, because we don't want to be seen as sacrilegious. We don't want to be seen as less spiritual. We don't want to be seen as less godly, right? So we start to equate joy and pleasure with being less religious, right? So if someone is more focused on ease, which is definitely something that I was struggling with recently, which is I'm all about ease, but I found like, oh my gosh, too much ease. That means that like I'm just so sacrilegious, right? There's no suffering involved. So that means that I am just so moving away from the divine. So I need to bring suffering into it. But that's actually not true. So that also could be our own trauma. And a lot of us struggle with making more money because we need to tie it to the divine or to a scripture or to the Bible. But what if money is just a human construct, right? Money is just a human construct. I've done a podcast on the spirit of money where I shared how the concept of money has changed over time. It started off as being shells, wheat, goats, cows, and now it's like numbers on a screen. We now have moved into cryptocurrency. So money itself has changed, but the concept of money has constantly remained as a concept that is evil, which I find so, so fascinating, because what is considered money continues to change from generation to generation, right? So very, very interesting. And it's a very, very interesting exploration for all of us, I feel. And then there's another study by Henrik et al., right? A 2019 study by Henrik et al. Asked this question: what is the relationship between religion and war? The simple answer, what is the relationship between religion and war? And here's the answer, right? Is that war may create lasting trauma, uncertainty, intensity, and highlight thoughts of death. But the more trauma we endure, and when people go through war, the more religious people tend to be, right? So I found that so interesting, and I had to go deeper. And I found an article by Mihai Andrei in 2019 where he says, first, both theory and evidence suggest that external threats cause people to adhere more tightly to social norms, including their religious beliefs and practices. As for the second hypothesis, religions may have culturally evolved to specifically exploit the psychological states created by uncertainty and existential threats as a means to more effectively disseminate themselves, right? So sometimes, and this is true of all of us, right? I'm no different. I came to Buddhism because I was so traumatized and I was struggling, right? So I needed something to help me heal. So basically, what the research shows is that the more trauma we endure, the more wars we endure, the more likely we are to become even more religious, right? And part of that is that religion helps us maneuver and how do I put it? Yeah, I think maneuver is the right word. It helps us maneuver challenging times, and it's a very, very important part of human nature, right? It's a very, very integral part to who we are. Understanding that having a relationship with the divine, or whoever we deem the divine to be, is an important aspect of human nature, right? But most of us tend to go there or tend to develop that relationship even more strongly when we are deeply traumatized. And what I want to say, is it possible to develop that relationship even more when we are not? And what would that look like? If our relationship with divinity isn't so much shaped by how much trauma we endure, but how much joy we endure, how much expansion we can hold, what if that is also something that we can look at how that would also shape our relationship with the divine? Just a thought and just my thinking, right? I think a lot about that because that is where I'm at the moment, where I'm asking myself those questions, where I'm like, what if changing my relationship with the divine isn't so much one that is based on how I was taught to love by my mother, and I was taught what love was because she learned that from her parents, and in particular her father, right? And it is more about my own relationship with the divine. And there are tons of journal prompts in the Money Magic course on this in lesson 17, where it's all about what is my relationship with the divine and how do I want that relationship to look like outside of just I'm coming because I'm so traumatized and because I'm so scared of the world. What if my relationship was shaped by how much expansion I could have, how much joy I could allow in, how much love I could allow in? And what if the divine is happy that I love people equally or even more than I love the divine? Like I love God, that I love myself just as much? What if I don't have to be scared of the divine? What if the divine doesn't carry envy and jealousy or any of those things? What would that relationship look like for me? And how would it be shaped if it wasn't informed by fear or deep scars and deep wounds? And how would it evolve? You know, because yes, I came to the work for that, but now I realize to heal at that deep level. But now I realize that I'm now doing the work to not just heal, but to expand, to hold more lightness, to hold more joy, to hold more bliss. Yeah. So those are just my thoughts. And then the second last part of this podcast, I want to talk about healing the God wound. So I've spoken ad nauseum about it. We've done an entire discourse. I've even shared research. So for me, the way that I've been healing the God wound really has been through lesson 17 of the Money Magic course. That's how a lot of my clients do it. It's through EFT tapping. I have very specific scripts in the Money Magic course under lesson 17 of the God wound, right? There's EFT tapping, there's breath work, there's meditations, the guided meditations. And then I've got journal prompts in there. I've got so many journal prompts in there. And I think those journal prompts are really, really powerful. So how I do the work is I do a lot of my own guided meditations, and this is how I tell my clients to do it. Again, the God wound, you guys can go Google it. There's no actual thing called the God wound. That's why I put it in the book, because I was like, I want to copyright this, right? And explain what it is in terms of trauma. So that's why it's in the book. The God wound is a body of work that is unique to Wealthy Money, and in particular, the Money Magic course, right? And as you can imagine, there's so much depth to this. It brings up a lot of grief. It brings up a lot of forgiveness. I feel like it also brings, part of the work is that it gives you so much peace. I've spoken about the expansion that I've received, but it's beyond that. It's feeling like I am supported and I am worth being supported as a human soul on this planet, and that I can call on divine support when I need it, and that I don't have to believe, just make myself believe, especially if you're someone like me that has struggled with faith and believing, and you don't understand it, and you feel that you need to follow, and you don't want to follow the traditional path of reading different holy books, because that's just not my thing, it's not my vibe, right? And you love to question things. I feel like the God wound is so healing in that, because it helps you, healing the God wound helps you heal your relationship with what divinity looks like. My dad would always say to me growing up that a man's relationship with his God is a man's relationship with his God, right? That you cannot tell another person how to worship, how to have faith, how to display faith, what faith looks like, because you're not in someone's heart. You don't know if they truly have faith, right? Someone that may never read a holy scripture or set foot in a temple or a church may follow more of the tenets of faith than someone that is there consistently on a daily basis. So again, faith, I believe, is something that is embodied, right? And faith is something that I worked on and developed. It's not something that I just believed. And what I believe in is unique to me. My relationship with the divine is really unique to me, and that needed healing in my own unique way. And this is why I love the God wound meditation. And of course, it has ancestral elements to it. We call in the ancestors, we go into past lives, we go into Akashic records. So just putting it out there, because some people are not into anything to do with ancestral stuff. But if that's totally your vibe, definitely check out the Money Magic course. Hit me up for a discovery call. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk. Let's find out if the Money Magic course is for you, or if you want to do one-on-one coaching. Yeah, let's really have a conversation. For me, the other thing that I've learned recently is that my work on visibility, like my vow of invisibility was actually a God wound. So that's why, like, sometimes doing the vow of invisibility work didn't get me the results that the God wound got me, because a lot of my work is still me being at war with myself and at war with the divine. So one of my favorite meditations always in the Money Magic course is under the God wound meditation God wound section, lesson 17 of the Money Magic course, which is the vow to prove the unfairness of God. And again, like I said, there are so many different modalities on healing the God wound that I've got in the course. And just the vow to prove the unfairness of God meditation is about 45 minutes long. It's a very in-depth guided meditation. It's very detailed. And then afterwards, there are those journal prompts, some of which I've shared with you guys as I answered questions on here, right? So before I close off and thank you guys, I just want to encourage you guys to share your thoughts in the comment section about this particular podcast. What are your thoughts on it? Are you triggered? Many people tend to get triggered when I talk about the God wound. It triggers so many people because I'm talking about things that they've been taught not to ever voice, right? You're not allowed to voice that you're angry about the divine, that you don't like fearing the divine. So it causes a lot of discomfort. So do share your thoughts, your experiences. You can share on social media. You can send me. You can share in the comment section here. Share on YouTube, Podbean. If you're listening on Podbean, if you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on Spotify, leave a review as well. So I'd really, really appreciate that. And of course, also send this podcast to other people. If you think that there are people that will find great value in this podcast, then definitely please send this through to them. I tie a lot of things to our finances, and as I've shared, a lot of my work, when you read any of my books, it's extremely well researched. Before I voice a thing, I look at the research, I test it on me, I ask clients to be guinea pigs, and I start to look at the results of it. So yeah. And of course, definitely, if you are like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm ready for the Money Magic course, then get the book. What's Your Money Personality? Changing the Way Black Families Manage Their Finances. A lot of it is in here. The God wound is in them. Yeah, definitely. So with that, I want to say thank you so much, guys, for listening to the very end, staying with me on this podcast, exploring the God wound, that trauma, and really understanding what it does to us as people, right? And if you are interested in the Money Magic course, the link is in the description of this video. You can just go to wealthy-money.com/money magic. Again, wealthy-money.com/money magic to sign up. You can, if you want to have a discovery call with me, either about the Money Magic course or one-on-one coaching, hit me up. I'll send you the link to have a discovery call and we can have a conversation, right? But before I leave, as usual, I am going to leave you with a quote. This is one of my favorite quotes. It's a quote by Shauna Nyquist, the author of Cold Tangerines, Celebrating Extraordinary Nature, the Extraordinary Nature of Everyday Life. And she says, I want to sleep hard on clean white sheets and throw parties and eat ripe tomatoes and read books so good they make me jump up and down. And I want my everyday to make God belly laugh, glad he gave life to someone who loves the gift. Literally, that last part is my favorite, so I'm going to read it again. I want my everyday to make God belly laugh, glad that he gave life to someone who loves the gift. Oh, so good. Thank you guys. Have a fantastic day further. Look forward to hearing your feedback on this podcast.